just because we're not able-bodied or we're chronically ill or whatever, we're different, we're not being seen. Just because we don't have a perfectly tied bow on the end of our gender transition doesn't mean our gender transition wasn't perfect for us. And that needs to be seen. We need to see more people having lots of different sorts of shapes and sizes of gender transition and realise that that's still a perfect transition. Even if we come out the other side of transition, still having to do work on ourselves, that's okay, because life isn't neat and tidy. Whose life ever is a perfect fairy tale ending? It isn't, is it? Life is just messy and up and down and whatever, but actually that is real life. And that's what it means for me, is transitioning and then being able to cope with life. That's what it is. Life was never about transitioning and then going off into a fairy tale ending. It was about transitioning, becoming me, and then because I'm me, being able to deal with whatever life threw at me. Hey folks, it's Finn. Welcome back, lovely people. Thank you so much for choosing to spend time with me today. And if you're watching for the very first time, then thank you so much for choosing to watch one of my videos. Massive welcome. It is lovely to meet you for the very first time. So I'm Finn, and this furry bundle that you can just about see on the floor is Captain Pip Digby. He usually lies here, but for some reason he's chosen the floor. But that's fair enough. It's all about choice, isn't it? Personal autonomy and all that. Digressing already. So today I've realised it's been a while since I've done a transgender topic, and let's do that and talk about all things trans, because it's now been 11 years since I started testosterone. 11 years. Actually, it's been longer than 11 years. Let's just clarify this, because I've got it written on my hand. I am actually on the 11th of April 2013 I started testosterone, and it's now August, isn't it? April, it's May, June, July, August. So it's been 11 years and 4 months. But I have ME/CFS, POTS, manner of things, which mean that I am always late. I'm never on time. I'm always tardy. Can't help it. People who are subscribers, members of the Finn fam, know this about me, and you love me for it, so it's fine. I get there eventually. Yes, I do. So a little bit behind, but here we are. So I am 11 years and 4 months on testosterone. I am on Libido. I've been on Libido from the start. Works well for me, thank goodness. So what can we say at 11 years on testosterone that I haven't already said? Well, today what I want to talk about is the fact that there is no perfect ending except the perfect ending that I'm currently having. Well, isn't that a bit of a cryptic title for a video? Well, what I'm getting at is this, right? When we read memoirs, when we see stories in the media, there are all these stories that are generally ones that can be easily consumed, easily wrapped up in nice little pretty bows, you know. They tend to be trans stories where people look very cisgender accepted, you know, people that easily pass as cisgender tend to be very young, tend to be people that have been married, are usually very cis-normative, you know, they're usually straight couples, straight white couples, young, able-bodied. And these are the stories that tend to get put out by the media, because these are the people that are the most accepted, you know. This tends to be what we see. We are still not seeing a lot of diversity when it comes to gender stories, you know. It's it's hard, isn't it? Because we're still very young in being accepted as a community. So to make us palatable for the rest of the world, the stories that are getting shared are these kind of ones that are easy to consume, which really waters down our trans community, because within our trans community we are a very, very diverse bunch. And one of the reasons I started sharing on YouTube was because I wanted to add my story to the mix, because I didn't see my story on YouTube. When I very first started to realise that I was transgender, one of the things that was stopping me from coming out was I wasn't seeing older people, and I also wasn't hearing my story. I wasn't somebody that had known all my life I was trans. I'd had an inkling that there was something was different about me, but I hadn't known what. And I hadn't realised until the age of 37. So I thought, well, I can't be trans then, you know? And then I started to find people like me who were older, who hadn't known all their lives. But once they realised they were trans, they then looked back on their lives and realised they did know. They didn't have the words, you know? So for me, it was really important to add my story to the narrative, because there are so many different ways to find out you're trans. You can find out at any age. You can transition at any age. But you weren't seeing that narrative out there. And I wanted to add my narrative to that mix. I think it's so important that we talk about all the different ways to find out you're trans, talk about all the different people, all the different ages that we find out we're trans. And I think it's equally important to talk about all the different ways we transition and all the different places we arrive at when we've gone through our main kind of social and medical transitions. Because I think it's very dangerous to have this idea that you kind of come through social and medical transition in whatever kind of things you choose. Because let's remember that we all choose different pathways, and this is also what's really important to talk about. That, you know, often when we're talked about in the media, there's been this idea that there's a social transition and there's a medical transition, that you have X, Y, Z, ping, you're done. And that, you know, that's not the truth. We have different pathways. We all choose different things depending on what we need. But there's this idea that we arrive in this certain happy place and we're all perfectly done and we're okay. And what that looks like, and it looks different for all of us, you know. We all go into transition with different histories and different experiences that aren't necessarily solved by transition. But then that doesn't mean that our transition hasn't worked, you know. And I've talked about this in a number of videos, where one thing that people forget is that by the time, especially older trans people, go through transition, we've often gone through a lot of trauma. And so although gender transition will solve the gender side of things, we still need to work on the trauma beforehand, you know. Living with gender dysphoria that's undiagnosed for so many years, and I'll link you to a video where I talk about this, causes a heck ton of trauma. And you can solve the gender dysphoria, but then you still need to work on all of the unresolved trauma, you know, that is left behind. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because, as people that follow me and have seen my story know, I now have quite severe chronic illness. I have ME/CFS, I have POTS, I have hypothyroidism, I have polymyalgia rheumatica, I have some long-standing mental health problems, depression and anxiety that I'm managing. Those, you know, the depression, anxiety was there beforehand, the addiction was there beforehand, I've got clean and sober. My mental health problems are much better, my anxiety is much more managed, but it's ongoing, I'm working through it. The chronic illness started towards the end of my transition, you know, and I'm living with that now. And what I'm often faced with now is people either blaming my gender transition for this, or saying things like, you know, oh, it's such a shame, it's such a waste, You know, I look at some of the comments I've seen recently are things like, you know, looking at you at the beginning of your transition and now it's a shock. And it's this kind of idea that somehow my transition has been wasted or it hasn't worked because I'm now poorly. And I just want to really clarify that that's completely false. Yes, it's unfortunate that I'm unwell, but that doesn't then mean that my gender transition has not worked. It's clearly worked. I am incredibly happy to be the man I am today. If I wasn't the man I am today, I'd have chronic illness and be dealing with gender dysphoria, which would be a whole heap worse than it is. Now, I've also made a video talking about the fact that my gender transition did not cause my chronic illness. Of course, it's played into it, but not in the way that people think. The years of stress, anxiety, all of these things have definitely played into my having chronic illness. You can't go years and years and years of gender dysphoria and all of that stress and anxiety that's involved and not have it affect your nervous system. You know, living with trauma affects your nervous system. That's definitely played into my being vulnerable to a chronic illness. Definitely has. But gender transition in itself hasn't caused it, you know. I've explained this a number of times. But regardless of that, it's not like just because I have these things that then that negates any happiness I've got from my gender transition. When we look at having chronic illness, you know, I think and talk a lot about strengths that help me on a daily basis to manage the difficulty of living with chronic illness, because of course living with chronic illness is incredibly hard. But one of the biggest strengths on a daily basis that gets me through it is being the man I am today and living as the man I am today, free of gender dysphoria, in a body that matches who I am and that gives me daily joy. That is my absolute daily strength and resilience. You know, whenever I'm at my lowest, on days where my chronic illness is just being so frustrating, when I'm doing my best to pace and yet everything is going wrong and I've got symptoms left, right and centre and I've done nothing to warrant them and I'm really frustrated, you know, the joy that comes from just being me is what keeps me going. Without that, you know, I don't know where I'd be. I've just turned 14 years clean and sober. The only reason I've been able to stay clean and sober is because I have an absence of pain now, because I was trying to block out all the pain of just trying to live as a person that I clearly wasn't, you know, all that gender dysphoria that was just such hell every day. You know, I wouldn't have been able to stay clean and sober if it hadn't been for my gender transition, you know. Life isn't this perfect thing. We can't avoid stuff happening to us. Anybody at any moment can end up disabled with an illness. Anything can happen to anyone at any given moment. And it then doesn't take away the good things that have happened, you know. I always say this about, you know, two things are possible at once. You can be poorly but still have joy. You know, it is absolutely perfectly possible to have two things going on in your life at once. And like I say, yes, of course, chronic illness is really hard to live with. And of course, if I could wave a magic wand, I would make it go away. But that then doesn't take away from the fact that my gender transition has been incredibly successful. My life is a million times better. And if I'd have, with what I've been through in my life, as I've said in other videos, the likelihood is, even without going through gender transition, I would have been a prime target for ME, CFS, bots, and everything anyway. And imagine having that and still having gender dysphoria. You know, I probably would have ended up still drinking and adding alcohol and drugs on top of all of this illness as well. I mean, goodness me, I wouldn't be managing as healthily and as clear headedly as I'm managing my chronic illness at the moment, you know. And besides that, even with a chronic illness, it doesn't mean my life's over. People often talk about me as if my life is over. Oh, poor him, it's such a waste. I'm not dead. You know, I'm having to live my life at a much slower pace. I've had to give up a lot. Yes, but that doesn't mean my life's over. I've just had to live differently. And this is so important to talk about because there are so many transgender people who were either disabled at the beginning of their gender transition and they've gone through transition. Where are them? Why are we not seeing them? There are lots of transgender people who've become disabled during their gender transition and we're not seeing them. Why? Just because we're not able bodied or we're chronically ill or whatever, we're different, we're not being seen. Just because we don't have a perfectly tied bow on the end of our gender transition doesn't mean our gender transition wasn't perfect for us. And that needs to be seen. We need to see more people having lots of different sorts of shapes and sizes of gender transition and realise that that's still a perfect transition. Even if we come out the other side of transition, still having to do work on ourselves, that's okay. And it's understandable. Because anybody that has gender dysphoria and has a gender that's different to that assigned at birth is likely to need to do work on themselves. And just going through hormones and surgery isn't going to solve everything. So coming out the other side, there likely is still going to be work that needs to be done. And that's okay. You know, and we need to see more and hear more stories where there isn't just this perfect little bow on the end and we can go, but look how happy this person is. It doesn't look all neat and tidy, but that's okay because life isn't neat and tidy. Whose life ever is a perfect fairy tale ending? It isn't, is it? Life is just messy and up and down and whatever, but actually that is real life. And that's what it means for me, is transitioning and then being able to cope with life. That's what it is. Life was never about transitioning and then going off into a fairy tale ending. It was about transitioning, becoming me, and then because I'm me, being able to deal with whatever life threw at me. Okay, I wasn't expecting to become chronically ill, but because I've transitioned, because I'm now who I am and I'm free from pain, I'm able to cope. I don't need drugs and alcohol. I don't need to self-harm. I've got the ability now to face life head on, to make proper choices, to respond to life rather than react to life and deal with it. You know, and that's because I'm who I was supposed to be and I'm comfortable in my own skin. So this might not look like a fairy tale ending, but it is my fairy tale ending. And yes, at 11 years on T, I'm still one very, very happy man, even with what I'm facing. So yeah. And Pip agrees, even if he's fast asleep. So yes, that's my 11 years on T rant. If you have any questions, if anybody else is out there in the same boat, feeling the same way, feeling not heard, then I'd love to hear your story. So please do leave them in the comment section below. I would love to hear you. If I'm not replying much at the moment, that's because I'm currently waiting for my contact lenses to arrive. I've got glasses, but I really struggle with my glasses. I can't see properly because the edges really annoy me, so I take them off. So I'm waiting for my contact lenses to arrive. And now I will be replying to many more of your messages because I'm struggling. But yes, it's bank holiday this weekend. So I hope everybody has a lovely bank holiday weekend in the UK, of course. We are off in Bluebell again for a weekend. Just local because, well, it's easier, isn't it? But yeah, waffling. I'm going to sign off. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm putting up with my rant. I look forward to listening, reading your comments. Take care of yourselves. See you next week.
So talking